Hello, beautiful soul. Welcome back to Everything Within podcast. I'm your host, Alina Krasnožon. This podcast is all about empowering you to build an extraordinary, fulfilling life and tap into the limitless potential that resides within you. Thank you for tuning in today. Have you ever noticed something everywhere lately? This relentless message from business coaches, content creators, and self-proclaimed gurus about needing perfect clarity before you start. They preach that you must first discover exactly who you want to help, crystallize your perfect message, and define your precise niche all before you even begin. What if waiting for perfect clarity is actually the very thing keeping you stuck? What if all those courses, programs, and self-help books you're consuming aren't bringing you closer to clarity, but instead trapping you in an endless loop of research and procrastination? What if clarity isn't something you find by thinking and planning, but something you create through action? Be honest with yourself for a moment. How many breakthroughs have you experienced while planning for weeks, doing endless research, and consuming yet another course? Now compare that to the insights you've gained when you've actually put yourself out there, when you've started moving, creating, sharing your voice, or engaging with real people. I see this pattern everywhere. People spending months, even years in preparation mode, researching endlessly, perfecting their message in isolation, waiting for that magical moment when everything clicks and absolute certainty arrives, and when they will finally feel ready to take action. But that moment, it rarely comes from more thinking, it comes from doing. Clarity isn't the prerequisite for action, it's the result of it. Throughout this episode, we'll explore why action creates clarity in ways that planning never can. We will uncover the messy, imperfect beginnings behind what now look like overnight successes. If you've been feeling stuck, waiting for a perfect moment of clarity, this episode might be just the permission you need to start anyway. Messy, imperfect, and open to discovering your true path through movement. Taking action rather than more thinking and planning. So let's challenge this persuasive myth about clarity once and for all. Let's begin. Our culture has developed a dangerous obsession with perfect clarity and planning before action. Think about it. We've been trained since childhood to believe that expertise must precede expression. Don't raise your hand unless you're absolutely certain of the answer. Don't submit your work until it's flawless. Don't speak up unless you're the authority on the subject. This obsession with preventative clarity didn't appear from nowhere. Our traditional educational system has conditioned us this way for generations. Remember school? You study first, then take the test. You memorize the facts, then demonstrate your knowledge. You absorb information passively before you're even allowed to create or contribute. This model completely misaligned with how innovation, creativity, and personal growth actually happen. I struggled with this big time when I started doing creative work. I felt that I knew nothing and that I needed to do an endless research before creating anything worth sharing. This conditioning ran so deep that breaking free from it felt almost impossible. But here is what I eventually realized. This relentless pursuit of clarity before taking action was actually my biggest barrier. Our brains are wired to crave certainty before action, and for good evolutionary reasons. Uncertainty registered as danger to our ancestors. Planning helped predict outcomes and keep us safe. Even today, our brain's primary job isn't to make us happy or creative. It's to keep us alive and safe by minimizing risk. That's why when you're about to share your work, your brain floods with anxiety. It's not actually trying to sabotage you, it's trying to protect you from the unpredictable social consequences of putting yourself out there. The discomfort you feel isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's the evidence that you're pushing beyond your brain's safety-first programming. This explains why expanding your tolerance for the unknown is so crucial for creative work. Each time you take action without perfect clarity, you're essentially telling your brain, see, we survived that uncertainty. It's safe to do it again. This gradually retrains your neural pathways to become more comfortable with ambiguity, the very state where creativity thrives. The cost of waiting for perfect clarity is far greater than most people realize. First, you sacrifice momentum, that invisible force that makes the second creative act easier than the first, and the 10th easier than the 5th. Momentum isn't just about productivity, it's about building neural pathways that make creation your default mode, rather than an exceptional event. Second, you miss the skill building that only comes through repetition. Clarity of voice, style, and message aren't theoretical concepts you can learn from books. They're muscles developed through consistent use. And when you don't use these muscles, they atrophy. Third, you never develop the essential meta skill of our time, the ability to function effectively through uncertainty. When you constantly wait for clarity before acting, you're not teaching yourself the very capability that defines successful creators: comfort with uncertainty. Fourth, there is the emotional spiral that waiting creates. In that gap between planning and action, your mind fills the void with doubts, comparisons, and worst-case scenarios. Action, however, anchors you in the present moment, the only place where anxiety cannot exist. When you're fully engaged in creating, those swirling thoughts simply don't have room to take hold. Research confirms what successful creators know intuitively. A 2019 study from Stanford's Design School found that groups who prototype early and frequently produce demonstrably more innovative solutions than groups who spend the same amount of time planning before executing. Similarly, creativity researchers at Cornell found that professionals who generate imperfect work consistently, rather than waiting for ideal conditions, show significantly higher creative achievements over time. Perhaps most telling is the work of psychologist Carol Dweck on mindset. Her research shows that people who believe abilities are developed through action, a growth mindset, consistently outperform those who believe abilities must be perfect before demonstration, a fixed mindset. The clarity-first approach is fundamentally a fixed mindset trap. The truth is both simpler and more challenging than the clarity myth suggests. You don't get clear and then start. You start and then get clear. Every successful creator didn't wait until they had it all figured out. They figured it all out by doing the real work. Let's talk about the mechanism that actually generates clarity, the action-clarity cycle. This is the process that creates real progress, real insight, and real direction in your creative work. The cycle works like this: action, data, insight, better action. Taking action isn't the same as planning endlessly. While having some initial direction is helpful, it's not the planning or waiting for complete clarity that moves you forward. It's taking imperfect action, gathering real-world data from that action, extracting insights, and then taking better action on what you've learned. When you publish that first blog post, launch that imperfect podcast, or share that initial social media content, you're not just creating, you're conducting an experiment that generates data no amount of planning could provide. You discover how people actually respond, not how you imagine they might respond. You learn what resonates and what falls flat. You see firsthand where confusion arises or where connection happens. The key is approaching this data with a scientific mindset, not an ego-driven one. When something doesn't land as expected, they're not failure. It's invaluable market research you couldn't have obtained any other way. Every response, Every metric, every piece of feedback becomes information that shapes your next move more effectively than another hour of research ever could. This brings me to a critical mindset shift. There is no such thing as a wrong action when it comes to creative work. There are only actions that generate different kinds of data. I used to wait weeks, months, sometimes even years, trying to gain clarity before taking action. I believed there was some perfect approach waiting to be discovered through more planning, more courses, reading more books, and more preparation. But the clarity never came from waiting. It always emerged from doing. What I've learned is that those supposedly wrong or imperfect actions were precisely what I needed. The podcast episode that felt awkward led me to discover my authentic voice. The message that didn't resonate helped me to understand what actually matters to my audience. The launch that underperformed revealed what truly motivates people to engage. This isn't just my experience, it's the hidden pattern behind every creative success story. Writers discover their voice by writing, not by studying writing. Entrepreneurs find product market fit by launching new products, not by perfecting business plans. Coaches develop their methodology by coaching actual clients, not by endlessly refining theoretical approaches. This represents a fundamental mindset shift from seeing action as the thing you do after you have clarity to recognizing action as the very mechanism that generates clarity. It's moving from a fixed mindset where you need to be ready before starting to a growth mindset where starting is precisely how you become ready. But here is what it gets really powerful. The compound effect of small, consistent actions over time. Each small, imperfect action you take might feel insignificant in the moment. The podcast episode that only few people heard, that social post that didn't go viral, that newsletter that had a modest open rate. In isolation, these moments can feel discouragingly minor. But underneath the surface, something profound is happening. You're building neural pathways that make creation easier. You're developing the muscle memory of showing up. You accumulate insights that invisibly shape your understanding. You're teaching your nervous system that uncertainty is survivable. These small actions compound in ways that become visible only in retrospect. 5 years from now, you will look back amazed at how far you've come. Not through one perfect action, but through hundreds or thousands of imperfect ones. This is why having a bigger vision matters. It's not about getting immediate perfect results. It's about staying in the game long enough for compounding to work its magic. This is why showing up when it's uncomfortable, when it's scary, when you don't feel ready is precisely what separates those who find clarity from those who forever chase it. If you genuinely feel you need to learn more, that's valid, but be strategic. Dedicate specific limited time for learning, but protect the majority of your time for action. A good ratio might be 20% learning, 80% doing, because no amount of consumption can replace the learning that comes from creation. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of this cycle is how action addresses the things you don't even know that you don't know. Here is what planning can never account for: the opportunities, insights, and directions that aren't even on your radar yet. No amount of preparation can reveal these because they emerge only through engagement with the real world. When you take action, you step into the present moment. You encounter possibilities that weren't visible from the planning stage. You discover that what you thought was your message evolves when it meets an actual audience. You find that your assumed target market isn't quite right, but an unexpected group resonates deeply with your work. Real-world engagement reveals patterns you could never predict. The content you genuinely enjoy creating often turns out to be exactly what resonates most with others. You discover that you don't need to follow trends to be relevant. Authenticity creates its own magnetism. Your writing skills improve with each blog post published. not through more courses on writing. Your voice becomes stronger and more refined through every podcast episode you release, in ways no amount of preparation could accomplish. You begin to develop a different relationship with uncertainty itself. Rather than seeing the unknown as something to be feared and eliminated through more planning, you start to recognize it as the fertile space where creativity, opportunity, and growth actually happen. You don't need to have it all figured out to begin. In fact, you can't have it all figured out until you begin. Clarity isn't waiting for you at the end of more research or another course. It's waiting for you on the other side of action. Let's look at how this principle of action before clarity plays out in the real world. I will briefly highlight a few powerful examples before sharing my own journey. Airbnb's evolution. Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia weren't executing a grand hospitality revolution plan. They were just trying to make rent by putting air mattresses on their floor during a conference. Each small action revealed new possibilities they couldn't have predicted, eventually creating clarity about an entirely new market category. Notion. The team behind Notion is now ubiquitous productivity tool experienced 4 complete failures before finding their path. They started with only a vague idea of how to make collaboration better. Their clarity about what Notion should be came through putting imperfect versions into users' hands and letting real feedback shape their direction. When I first started, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I just knew I wanted to teach foreign languages, so I created social media accounts without any strategy or expertise in social media, and profiles on language teaching platforms. This led to my first clients. I was completely figuring it all out as I went along. To gain some direction, I started following people doing similar work and eventually invested in working with a personal branding coach. This was helpful in some ways, but it actually led me to a dangerous place. I became so focused on planning and trying to create perfect clarity that I stopped taking action altogether. I fell into the trap of thinking once I finish working with this coach, then I will be 100% ready to show up online and create content. But that moment of complete readiness never came. Even after developing my website and social media presence with the coach's guidance, something felt off. I experienced tremendous resistance to creating content the way I was being instructed. The clarity I thought would come through planning simply didn't materialize. The real breakthrough happened when I began sharing more about my mindset and personal journey on social media without a clear plan or strategy. It just felt more aligned. Following this feeling rather than predetermined path led me to an unexpected insight. I realized I didn't actually enjoy teaching languages. What I wanted was something else entirely, though I couldn't yet articulate what. Instead of retreating back into more planning, I kept taking imperfect action. I noticed I'd developed website design and tech skills while building my own website, something I genuinely enjoyed, so I took another small step, searching for my first website design clients in Facebook groups. This led to several paying projects, which built my portfolio, which attracted more clients through my rebranded website. Some clients began finding me through social media, further boosting my confidence. Each step didn't require complete clarity. It just required enough clarity for that next small move. I even took an intentional year-long pause from social media to focus exclusively on building my portfolio of website design projects. This wasn't failure or giving up. It was responding to the data I was gathering about what felt right and what was working. I realized I needed to prioritize building tangible skills before focusing on my online presence. Every significant bit of clarity I've gained came through action, never from waiting. That's how the idea for my podcast eventually emerged. Not from careful planning, but from my accumulated insights of all my previous actions. I simply started recording episode after episode, building my speaking skills, writing scripts, and learning the publishing and the editing process. Through doing the podcast, I discovered something I couldn't have planned for. I didn't want to focus exclusively on website design and tech. I wanted to expand, to share my experience and journey, to talk about the mindset blocks I'd personally overcome. The podcast became my perfect medium for this. It felt effortless, fun, and brought me tremendous joy. This led to another unexpected discovery. I love creating short videos and storytelling. Repurposing my podcast episodes into short videos became my most natural way of showing up online. I never would have discovered this through planning. It emerged only through the continuous cycle of action, feedback, and adjustment. Looking back, every meaningful step forward in my business came not when I had perfect clarity, but when I took action despite the lack of it. The moments when I paused, waiting for clarity, were exactly when I felt most stuck and anxious. The clarity I now have about my work, my message, and my audience was impossible to plan for. It could only be discovered through showing up and doing the work. Now that we understand why action precedes clarity, let's get tactical how to apply this to your creative work and business. I want to share specific approaches and tools that make this process both practical and powerful. First, let's talk about minimum viable clarity. The smallest amount of direction you need to take meaningful action right now. You don't need to have the next 5 years of your business mapped out in detail. You don't need absolute certainty about your ultimate niche or perfect client avatar. You don't need to know exactly how all the pieces will fit together. What you need is just enough clarity for your next move, maybe your next 3 moves at most. Ask yourself these questions to identify your minimum viable clarity. What feels interesting or energizing to explore right now? What's one problem I could help solve, even imperfectly? What's a small offering I could test with real people? What's one piece of content I could create this week? The beauty of this approach is that it keeps you focused on what's immediately actionable, rather than getting lost in hypothetical future. It grounds you in the present, where all meaningful work actually happens. Remember that you will evolve over time, and so will your business. Look at any successful creator's journey. Their early work often bears little resemblance to what they eventually became known for. It's the natural evolution that comes through taking action. Elizabeth Gilbert didn't start as a self-help author. She wrote for men's magazines. Brené Brown didn't begin her career talking about vulnerability. She was researching shame. Their clarity came through the process of creating, not before it. Give yourself permission to pivot as a new insights emerge. The path rarely looks like a straight line in retrospect. It's more like a series of connected experiments, each informing the next. Instead of treating your creative work as permanent declarations, think of them as experiments designed to generate specific insights. Here is how to structure these experiments effectively. Define one question you want to answer. Rather than trying to solve everything at once, focus each experiment on answering a specific question. Does this topic resonate with my audience? Or is this format one I enjoy creating? Or will people pay for this specific solution? Create the smallest possible test. What's the minimum viable version you can create to test your question? Instead of building an entire course, could you offer a single paid workshop? Instead of launching a weekly newsletter, could you write 3 emails to a small group? Instead of developing a full podcast season, can you release 2 episodes and gauge response? Identify your success metrics in advance. Before launching your experiment, decide what data would constitute useful feedback. This might be quantitative, views, engagement, rates, sales, or qualitative. Specific types of comment, the feeling you had while creating it, requests for more. Set a clear timeline. Give your experiment enough runway to generate meaningful data, but not too long that you become attached to it regardless of results. 2 weeks to 2 months is often the sweet spot for creative experiments. Document both data and feelings. Record not just the objective results, but also how the process felt for you. Sometimes the most valuable insight is discovering that something successful doesn't energize you, or something with modest external results brings you alive. The beauty of framing your work as experiments is that it creates psychological safety for taking risks. When something is an experiment, there is no failure, only data. This mindset releases the perfectionism that often keeps us from taking action in the first place. Run these experiments in public whenever possible. The feedback you get from real interactions with your work will always be more valuable than hypothetical planning in isolation. The faster you can move through the action, data, insight, better action cycle, the more rapidly clarity will emerge. Here is how to accelerate this process. Decrease the size of your action steps. Counterintuitively, smaller steps often lead to faster clarity. A 10-minute video posted today will generate more useful feedback than a perfectly produced 60-minute masterpiece 3 months from now. Build in public. Share your process, not just your polished results. This creates multiple feedback opportunities throughout your creation process rather than just at the end. Actively solicit specific feedback. Don't just release work and hope for responses. Ask precise questions that will generate the insights you need. What resonates most with you in this piece? Or what would make this more valuable to you? Create direct connection channels. Make it easy for people to give you feedback through comments, DMs, emails, or brief surveys. The lower the friction, the more data you will collect. Schedule regular reflection points. Set time weekly to review what you've learned from your actions. Without this intentional reflection, insights often go unnoticed or unintegrated. The key psychological benefit here is that faster cycle mean less attached to any single outcome. When you know another iteration is coming soon, the pressure to make everything perfect disappears. This creates the emotional safety needed for true creativity and experimentation. The ultimate tool for gaining clarity is consistent action followed by thoughtful reflection. No planning exercise, personality assessment, or business framework can replace the insights that emerge from putting your work into the world and paying attention to what happens next. Remember, clarity isn't something you wait for. It's something you create through deliberate, reflective action. The clearest vision for your work exists on the other side of consistent creation, not before it. Let's address more valid concerns about the action-first approach. This isn't about abandoning all planning or thoughtfulness. It's about finding the right balance that keeps you moving forward while being responsible and strategic. Some amount of planning and reflection isn't just helpful, it's essential. The key is right sizing your planning so it serves as a launchpad for action rather than a substitute for it. Consider these practical planning approaches that actually support forward momentum. Planning your content a week ahead rather than trying to map out month in advance. Maintaining a simple bank of ideas for your blog posts or podcast episodes that you can draw from when inspiration runs low. Having one blog post or podcast episode fully scripted and ready to go as a buffer for hectic weeks. Creating templates for recurring content types so you're not starting from scratch every time. This level of planning creates enough structure to prevent decision fatigue without becoming overwhelming. When you're trying to decide what to create, where to publish it, how to format it, what to say, and how to promote it all at once, that's when procrastination sets in. Breaking these decisions into smaller chunks through light planning makes action far more accessible. The right amount of planning also depends on your context. If you're creating content that requires research or involves sensitive topics, More preparation is warranted. If you're making significant financial investments or commitments that affect others, more thoughtful planning is ethically necessary. The question isn't whether to plan, but rather, is my planning serving my forward movement, or is it becoming a sophisticated form of procrastination? The action clarity cycle doesn't mean thoughtlessly rushing half-formed ideas into the world. It means integrating thoughtfulness into your action process rather than treating them as separate phases. You can strike this balance by building brief reflection moments into your creation process. Setting specific time limits for planning, like giving yourself just 30 minutes to outline a podcast episode. Scheduling short review sessions after completing projects to extract learning, or developing the habit of quickly checking in with your intuition before publishing. These practices honor thoughtfulness while maintaining the momentum that generates real clarity. I found that the most powerful insights often emerge during the creation process itself, not before it. When I'm writing a podcast script, the clarity about what I really want to say often crystallizes in the middle of drafting, not during my planning phase. Honoring this integrated approach to thoughtfulness allows those mid-creation insights to emerge. Taking action before complete clarity doesn't mean acting recklessly or without ethical consideration. Responsible experimentation means being mindful of the potential impact of your work. Here are principles for ethical experimentation in your creative work. Do no harm. Ensure your experiments won't negatively impact vulnerable individuals or spread misinformation. This is especially important when creating content around health, finance, or emotional well-being. Transparent iteration. Be open with your audience about your process of learning and evolving. When you change direction based on new insights, explain why. This builds trust rather than confusion. Honor commitments. If people have invested time or money based on your direction, respect those commitments even as you evolve. This might mean delivering what you promised while also sharing your new direction. Seek diverse feedback. Ensure your experimental feedback comes from diverse perspectives, not just those who already like you. This prevents creating echo chambers that limit your growth and potential impact. Remember that ethical experimentation often means starting small. Test a new approach with a limited audience before scaling it more broadly. This creates space for adjustments before potential negative impacts could affect more people. Finally, embracing an action-first approach doesn't mean being reckless with resources or reputation. It means being strategic about how you manage risk while you're still moving forward. Here are practical approaches to managing various types of risks. Financial risk. Start with low-cost experiments before making larger investments. A free workshop can test demand before developing a paid course. A soft launch to a small audience can validate an offer before a full-scale launch. Reputation risk. Build in quality checks appropriate to the visibility of your work. A tweet might need less research than a keynote presentation. Create systems that match the level of potential reputational exposure. Opportunity cost. Avoid overcommitting to any single direction until you have validation. This might mean creating shorter series, offering beta versions, or explicitly framing work as experimental. Emotional risk. Develop resilience practices that support you through the vulnerability of sharing work before you feel fully ready. This might include having supportive communities, maintaining perspective through journaling, or celebrating the act of shipping regardless of outcome. The greatest risk isn't taking imperfect action, it's waiting for perfect clarity that never comes. By thoughtfully managing specific risks while continuing to move forward, you create the conditions for both meaningful growth and sustainable creative practice. Remember that embracing uncertainty doesn't mean blind leaps. It means calculating steps into the unknown, with each step informing the next. The most successful creators aren't those who eliminate uncertainty, they are the ones who learned to function effectively within it. We've come full circle in our exploration of clarity through action, and perhaps now you can see why this message resonated so deeply with me and why I felt compelled to share it with you today. Clarity isn't waiting for you at the end of some research, another course, or endless preparation. It exists on the other side of action, imperfect, messy, sometimes uncomfortable action. This isn't just philosophical advice, it's the actual mechanism through which all meaningful progress happens. The feedback loop of action, data, insight, better action is the engine that powers every creative journey worth taking. I know firsthand how seductive the clarity myth can be. That voice that whispers, just a little more planning, just one more course, just a bit more research, and then you will be ready. It's the voice that sounds reasonable, responsible, and smart. But I also know the freedom that comes from recognizing this voice for what it truly is: fear disguised as thoughtfulness. And I've experienced the exhilaration of taking action despite uncertainty, of building clarity through movement rather than waiting for it to arrive through thinking. Think of clarity like water in a stream. It doesn't flow until you start moving the rocks. You can stare at a stagnant pool forever, waiting for it to clear, but clarity only emerges through the motion of the current. Your actions are what create the flow that brings clarity. So here is my challenge to you. Identify one area when you've been waiting for clarity before taking action. That blog you've been planning to start, that offer you've been thinking about launching, that creative project you've been researching for months. Now ask yourself, what's the smallest possible step I could take in this direction within the next 48 hours? Not the perfect step, not the complete solution, just the smallest viable action that would generate real feedback and move you forward. It might be publishing a simple post, sending a message to a potential client, recording a rough draft, or sharing an imperfect version with a trusted friend. I know the resistance that might be rising within you right now, but that's exactly where the opportunity lies. The things we're most resistant to sharing are often the very thing that once in motion will generate the most meaningful clarity. Remember, every creator you admire started before they were ready. Every business you respect began with imperfect action. Every message that has moved you emerged through the process of exploration, not before it. Your work, your unique contribution deserves the same chance to evolve through action. The world doesn't need more perfectly planned projects that never see the light of the day. It needs your messy, evolving, imperfect action that becomes more clear with each step you take. Clarity isn't the prerequisite of your journey, it's what you will discover along the way. So what will you start today, even without perfect clarity? Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Until the next time, bye!